This poem is titled Lansquenet, which is a card game, by the way. A spinster and a bachelor read over a rousing game of lansquenet in which the first was winning despite the latter's sleight of hand. She never was as good as she was wont to understand. Were waiting on an orator, a graduate of Gallaudet, who despite his inborn tongue-tiedness could still crowd command. A wrestler and a hustler, each a boozer and a guzzler, in a barroom north of Baltimore were hatching the plan. They do this every Sunday night over gin and black and tan. They'd comb the northeast corridor for an enterprising orator who'd promote the wrestler's knuckle fight and distract the hustler's bait. Hey man, you got this in the bag, you'll never make that. Wait. Meanwhile, our recent graduate, the Deputy Wunderkind of rhetoric, was on a train from Washington to a conference in New York. He would have liked to take a plane, but his agent was a jerk. He sat beside a stevedore, a native son of Baltimore. They tried to chat and mostly failed, the dockman's pantomiming pale beside a man who'd spent his life conversing with his hands. He got across, though, with some work, that he had a friend in Baltimore and a sister in New York. A spinster and a hustler who'd introduced once just to see if ever there was chemistry, and evidently there was none. After 15 minutes at the bar, the spinster walked out to her car and never came back in again. She'd left their game of Lansquenet after losing $80 and the bracelet off her hand. The hustler shrugged and finished off his pint of black and tan. How much the deputy got of this was never very evident. 10 minutes in, he turned away, and curling up, he hit the hay. At least he had a window seat. A wrestler and a hustler got on the train in Baltimore. The first had paid the posted fare, the latter was a cheat. They sat behind the stevedore, who asked what they had come there for, to which the hustler began, "We seek an enterprising orator along the northeast corridor," for reasons that seemed more compelling over gin and black and tan. The spinster and the bachelorette, now lunging at each other's throats, had not quite killed each other yet, but were coming all too close. The bachelorette was a cheat and a whore, worse than that thug from Baltimore. At least he had the courtesy to keep his foul play under wraps. The spinster was a spoil sport, so came the bachelorette's retort, a mirthless, frigid, horse-faced bore, who ought to have the courtesy to shut her fucking trap. As the women tussled on the floor, they heard a knocking at the door, and in haste they straightened up the place to hide the signs of their unrest. The bachelorette, that so-called whore, got to welcome in their guest. The man who met the bachelorette was that graduate from Gallaudet, but he seemed to have a retinue, 3 hangers-on of ill repute who lurked behind him, sniggering. A wrestler and a hustler and a stevedore from Baltimore. They tracked the recent graduate since he'd gotten off the train. Knowing only he was deaf and dumb, and thinking he might have some fun, the stevedore had told his chums his seatmate was an orator, the greatest maybe in the world, or at least the northeast corridor. They followed him along his route, just like some thuggish retinue, the two not knowing they'd been duped, the third that what he said was true. A spinster and a bachelorette and a graduate of Gallaudet and a wrestler and a hustler and a stevedore from Baltimore. The latter four, unsure their cue, were waiting in the corridor, the former two debating what on earth they ought to do. The spinster spied her brother, but alongside him another, who if he tried, by force or con, to from the threshold venture on, that is to step inside her door, God knows she'd throw a fit. Not to mention that Neanderthal, a man of burliness and brawl, who judging by the looks of him could tear them all to bits. The wrestler, a heavyweight, though on the light side in the pate, displayed no nose for subtlety, nor had he any gift of tact. He saw no barrier or wall to keep him holed up in the hall. He wiped his jackboots on the mat and lumbered on into the flat. He stood beside the bachelorette, upon her toes, to be exact. The hustler hustled to restrain his headstrong friend with half a brain. He found himself locked eye to eye with a hot and bothered one-off flame. "Get out, you lout! Look here, my dear, I'd no intention to offend. Just let me please extract my friend and we'll be getting on our way. Before we go, though, one more thing, I'd like to meet the orator. We think, your brother said he was, the perfect spokesman for our cause. I'd like to have a word with him." "He doesn't speak," was her reply, the stevedore chuckling on the sly. "I thought he was an orator. He's a very gifted orator." "I thought that he was deaf and dumb," the stevedore befuddled yelled. "He's a Cicero of ASL, the Demosthenes of the thumb, the Dr. King of the pinky finger. With the middle he's got quite a zinger if you catch where I am coming from. He's deaf all right, but hardly dumb." The hustler, stunned and still confused at this one part fluke and one part ruse, as if he'd caught a wild goose and doesn't know what next to do, lashed out against the stevedore. "You think it's funny, do you, sir? A hard-of-hearing orator? A man who cannot use his tongue to call a barroom one-on-one? Uproarious, in perfect taste." To avert a spat or all-out war between the hustler and the stevedore, it fell upon the bachelorette, whose toes were still by boot beset, to suggest a rousing game of Lansquenet. It'd be a splendid gay affair, they'd give their grievances some air, and extract their due in cash, not blood. The hustler, a shark at cards and a devotee of Lansquenet, took a seat beside the bachelorette and figured up his odds. As they played, he saw the bachelorette's unsettled tries at sleight of hand as everyone but the wrestler caught and demanded she play fair. The hustler, though, had other thoughts. He to the bachelorette impart the finer details of the art, had to con your marks of all they got while they play unaware. The spinster and the wrestler and the deaf-mute and the stevedore were all at half their pockets' worth when they wised up to his plan. The hustler feeling generous, bought each and every one of them a pint of black and tan. The next day at the seminar, the graduate, its shining star, delivered an oration the world wouldn't soon forget, but the hustler and the bachelorette who got to second over Lansquenet were otherwise engaged. That is to say, they were engaged, a decision that the bachelorette would, looking back, one day regret. They'd elope along the northeast corridor to the hustler's home in Baltimore, where he knew a back-alley minister who could join them in a jiff. The bachelorette was Jewish, but she didn't want to tiff. The spinster cursed that hustler and the hussy he romanced, and she cursed them more when she found the way that they their flight financed. They must have thought it quite a prank to empty out her piggy bank, and she doubted that her silverware went missing just by chance. Good riddance to that vulgar whore, now half the way to Baltimore, a wretched town of filth and gore. I bet before the year's out she tries to run away. The wrestler and the stevedore were also bound for Baltimore. Neither one completely sure what they'd even come to New York for, though over gin and black and tan it wouldn't matter anyway.